Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Christina, and on behalf of myosh, I want to thank you all for joining us today. Now, today, we really hope that you will learn how to prevent some serious incidents using critical control management and AI. One thing we want you to think about is whether you're truly focusing on what matters, or are you just going through the motions? Too often, organisations prioritise the urgent tasks instead of focusing on what is truly important. And in today's session, we'll show you how to stop merely completing those activities and start proactively managing critical risks. Now, we're so excited to have Adrian Manessis, the lead architect behind our Critical Control Management module, here with us, who will help to guide you through those powerful features of this tool, along with our integrated Bowtie and our new groundbreaking AI functionality. Now, whether you're managing safety in high-risk industries like mining or looking to enhance your organisation's approach to risk management, this session is going to equip you with the knowledge and tools to shift from reactive to proactive safety management, ensuring that you focus on what truly matters. Now, this is an interactive session, so we want to hear from you guys. Throughout the webinar, feel free to share your thoughts and ask your questions in the chat box. And let's make this a session where you walk away with some practical insights and a fresh perspective on safety management. I'm going to stop yapping and hand it over to you, Adrian.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christina. Thank you for the introduction. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to go through a few slides first, but it won't be depth through PowerPoint. There'll only be about 8 or 9 slides, and I'll cover them fairly quickly. And then I'll actually get into the actual software itself and show you how you can use a truly integrated system to be able to manage critical control management. First of all, let's have a look at the importance of critical control management. So critical control management is essential for protecting employees, contractors, and basically everyone, all stakeholders. So the main thing about critical control management is you're looking at preventing major incidents. So typically the things that will either cause serious injury or fatalities. Okay, so Christina touched on it a while ago, a few moments ago, but it's about focusing on what matters and what's important. So when you can identify your critical priorities, you can then be focusing on what needs to be done as opposed to, everything. So streamline allows you to streamline processes for better resource allocation. So you can assign resources to what's important. It also minimises distraction. So I've seen in many cases throughout many years, people say we should be completely incident free, and that's a great thing to try to achieve. But if you're focusing on minor things and you're neglecting the larger things, then you might end up having a fatality or a significant incident. And that's where the problems occur. Sometimes you can't get to everything. So once you've identified what's important, what matters, leaders can make informed decisions based on essential data. So it produces data to be able to say, well, we should be spending our time on different specific things. And we'll go through that process during the session today. Okay, so some of the things to look at is focus over, some organisations focus on activity over efficacy, and that is wrong. So organisations prioritise measuring safety activity, and they're not looking at the effectiveness of their safety programs. So as long as they're doing stuff, they feel like maybe they're a bit safer. So the result of that is it can lead to a tick and flick mentality where people are just going through lots of inspections and ticking and putting in comments and so forth. It can also lead to databases of incidents and non-conformances that typically may have, lack proper, analysis. And by the way, I'm not saying you don't do these things. You still need to do your incident investigations and you still need to do many of these other activities, but you've got to get the priorities right. So one of the things that CCM allows you to do is focus on improving work. So when you look at your controls, you look at how they work and how you can improve work, it actually improves efficiencies of processes as well. So counting processes doesn't ensure their quality or incident prevention. So if you're counting observations done or number of hazards logged and all those sorts of things, it doesn't necessarily mean you've got quality. It can be used for some indicators. Executives and organisations in general should be able to verify the effectiveness of the critical controls. So they're not looking at every control, they're looking at the ones that could cause a major event to occur. Okay, so CCM typically looks at your critical controls. You can then address the known control failures, so you can then verify them, and then you can mitigate the controls proactively. Okay, so one of the things you need to do is you need to understand what are your critical controls, and there's a very, very good guideline, the ICMM, International Council for Minerals and Metals. It gives you lots of guidelines on, and we can provide the links to that in the documentation or as part of this webinar, but it provides lots of guidelines on how to understand what is a critical control, what is it, and what are the various different aspects and the actual process itself. So there's a process in identifying that, and I'll go through some of that process today. So verify the control's functions, and you need to establish how a critical control should perform. When it should be available, what does it depend on? Does it depend on electricity or water or some other function? So understanding your critical controls means you can look at what are the ideal performance for that control. It needs to be there. If it's not there, then the event can occur. One of the things I've looked at is a lot of various different webinars and talking to different legal experts is the law. The CCM really works in well with legal compliance. So the law emphasises robust systems. Critical risks must be managed. So if you're doing a lot of activity, but you're not managing the critical risks and you have a major event, then in a legal situation, even though you're doing a lot of activity, that won't count for much. So CCM, typically I've spoken to various different inspectors and so forth, and what they will do is they'll come in and say, after a major incident or even as an audit, what are your 10 to 20 major hazards and what are you doing about them? And that's what critical control management looks at. What are those things? It's also about learning through CCM. So the process isn't just we've implemented critical control management. What it is it's learning, implementing, getting feedback, and re-implementing. So it's not just a once-off process. It's identifying when you have failures, identify why did that control fail? Why didn't it meet its performance requirements? Those sorts of things. So it can be used as a learning tool. It can be used as a way of improving work. It can identify control weaknesses, and it focuses on work improvement, not just ticking, flicking, doing audits. What are some of the challenges? We've had feedback and discussions with the ICMM directly, and there's quite a few different challenges that are impediments to implementing. And these are challenges that they've identified largely, but also I've seen anecdotally as well. So one is lack of integrated software. What people are doing is to try to actually measure, to verify, to systematically do this. Often organisations, if they're doing it at all, they're using multiple software packages and they're copying and pasting from one to the other, and to create their reports and to do their bow ties, and I'll talk about bow ties in a little bit more detail later, to document their critical controls and how they should perform and all that sort of stuff. So typically things are done in Excel, and some things are done in other programs, and some things are then exported to dashboards. It's that lack of integrated software traditionally has typically caused it to be very time consuming. And I've seen organisations where they spend, they've got 4 full-time employees on, for example, on a mine site. By the way, it can be used for many, many different industries. But they've had 4 full-time employees on a mine site just purely to manage their critical controls. And that's because they didn't have integrated software that was fit for purpose for doing these things. So the systems are disconnected. They don't connect to each other. There's lots of different systems if you want to do this. And that then poses more issues, because what happens is people then get leadership don't see the benefit of it. They see that they have to put in too many resources to actually get a result, and the results are often not consistent. So there's some challenges. There are other challenges as well, but they're the main ones that relate to the software that I'm talking about today. Okay, so let's talk about the CCM process just briefly. Now, the diagram that you can see on the right-hand side is taken from the ICMM guide, and they've got some great guides, a couple of great guides on their website that are freely available and easy to understand. The first part in green on the right-hand side is the planning process, and the bit in the yellow is the, I guess, the implementation and verification and reporting. So when you're looking at the overall process itself, you need to identify what they refer to. There's a bit of jargon in here, but material just simply means what do you define as an event that we need to do this process for. So identify the unwanted events, and typically those events will be one or more fatalities, potentially permanent disabling injuries, those sorts of things. So you can do that by looking at your industry. You can look at what you've had as a company and near misses. You can look at related industries, go to the different WorkSafe sites and so forth. And typically there's usually about 20 to 30 unwanted events that people go through this process with. They then identify the controls and to prevent and also to mitigate the event if it occurs. So a typical control in a car accident would be, a preventative control would be wearing a seatbelt. They identify the critical controls. Now, the ICMM guide gives a lot of guidance on what is a critical control. So an administrative control typically can't be a critical control. You're typically wanting to look at things like engineering controls, elimination and so forth. Once you've defined the critical controls, you then go through and you define the performance requirements. So how should that control work? What does it depend upon? And a whole series of other things. And I'll touch on that within the demonstration shortly. You should have accountability both for the events, but also for the controls as well. So you need to have a process where someone is responsible or accountable for a critical control. You need to then be able to implement those controls and also verify that those controls, and this is the bit that is extremely important. You've got to identify and verify that the control is actually working. And if you have failures, you need to be able to identify why did it fail? Do we need to go back through this process again and identify performance reporting? Do we need additional controls and so forth? Talking about integration, it also needs to integrate with other parts of your software, or should integrate with other parts of your safety software. So if you have a near miss, it should be linked and identify and feed into your critical control management module. If you are doing observations or you identify hazards, same sort of thing. So let's move past that and let's go into a demonstration. And what I'll do, I've mentioned the word Bowtie already, but I haven't really defined it very well. So one of the first things I'm going to do is actually define and just show you an example of Bowtie and how that's actually, and what that actually is. Again, I'm not going to teach you how to build a bow tie today and teach you the intricacies of what is a good bow tie and what is not. But what I will do is show you the basics of the concepts and so forth. Okay, so what I've got here is an example of a bow tie. Now, some of you kindly also sent me through some examples of things to look at, which I'll do fairly shortly as well. Okay, so typically a bow tie, I'll just take it to a bird's eye view for a moment. So this is uncontrolled release of energy. In the middle, we have the event and we have the related hazard associated that causes that event. Okay, or contributes to that event. Okay, on the left-hand side, what we have is we have causes. So the causes for the event to occur. And then we have controls. Some of those controls will be critical controls and some of those controls will be non-critical. So each of those controls is essentially defining how do we prevent that from happening. On the other side of the bow tie, what we have is mitigating controls. So if the unwanted event was a car crash, a mitigating control would be something like a seatbelt would then be a mitigating control to minimise or mitigate the consequences that can occur. Okay, so what typically happens in organisations is they go through and they build these bow tie diagrams. And these bow tie diagrams essentially allow you do this typically in workshop type situations, and it's good to involve frontline workers. So you get essentially you're getting feedback from the different people within the organisation as to what really worries them and what do they do to prevent or to mitigate things if the event occurs. Now, each of these traditionally bow ties are just fairly static diagrams, and one of the issues with bow ties that I saw when we first looked at this is, and especially in relation to the process, is they don't encourage like a cyclical improvement, continuous improvement type process. What they do is often they're done, you build them, they're very useful to be able to identify it and brainstorm and visually represent the unwanted event and all the things that you need to do, not all the things, but the main things, the main elements. But if you need to add additional controls, if you want to define accountability and all of those sorts of things, the bow ties often end up in filing cabinets or disk drives and never looked at again. So what we need is a process, and what we have is a process that allows you to be able to have that continuous improvement type process. So if you look at it here, each of these boxes represents a background record or a back-end record. So when I'm looking here, this is the background records that it actually generates. When you create the bow tie, it actually generates. So it brings in the information about the scenario, the risk scenario, the event itself, the hazard, and so on and so forth. It's also got all the controls listed, and each of these are individual documents that relate to those boxes that you see on there. So I'm going to focus at the moment on the isolate and de-energize control, and I could open that up from there, but alternatively I can go to my bow tie, and you'll notice on the on the top right hand corner there's a little box there which is an edit button. I can then just simply click on that, and what that's going to do is it's going to open up that particular document, that particular control, and then I can identify things like, is it a hard or soft control, the control type. I can put in things like, does it control, in fact, you can go through, and we've got a process which identifies if this is a critical control. So using the ICMM guidelines, you've got a series of checklists, and then it tells you. You've got things, can it be a global control? Can it be used in other bow ties? And if it's a global control, you do want to display the performance requirements. And you also record things like the control history. So when you've done a verification, so you verified it through maybe an inspection, the particular control, you want to be able to see what was the control history, when did it fail, what are the comments, what were the activities that we did to measure that failure, or the past for that matter. As I scroll through here, we'll see that this is the sort of information that's often put in lots of different places. So people store this information in Excel or Word documents or whatever. So, but this is all contained in one location with workflow. So a person is accountable for this. They're accountable for reviewing it, for monitoring it. They're getting email notifications. You can see you've got accountability because other people can see whether it's being monitored or not. So you've got everything in one place, and you've got the ability to monitor, and you've got the ability to make people accountable. So if we look at here, you've for the critical risks, or critical controls, I should say, you can identify performance requirements. So what does it depend upon? You normally have, a few more than that in here, but you can define each of the different types of performance requirements. How should this perform? What are the performance activities, and so on and so forth. I won't go through these in too much detail. Now, all of this is configurable, so you can configure this to have extra information. You can configure this to your specific needs as required. Okay, so what it is, I opened up a control just by simply clicking on the corner. If I wanted to open up the actual risk event itself, I could do the same thing from here. If I want to add an extra control, I can add the extra control in here, and then I can click on the corner and fill out the rest of the details. Okay, so if I'm creating a bow tie from scratch, I'm just simply clicking on Add Bow Tie, and then I can just fill out the details. So I fill out the risk scenario, and you're not going to watch me type anything today. That's useful at least. Causes, I can add more causes and so on. So again, as I said, this is typically done in a workshop type environment where you define each of these things, and then you go across to the right and do your consequences and your mitigating controls. Okay, I'm not going to save that one. I'll just close that one down. So the other way of doing a bow tie, and one of the things is we've focused on AI in improving work processes, or at least what we found, we implemented this without AI to begin with. And one of the challenges that I found is people were finding that starting from a blank piece of paper like I just did there requires a lot of effort, which is fine, but people feel a bit intimidated. And I've actually gone through and used AI to actually generate these bow ties instead of generating them myself. And it doesn't get it right perfectly. It does get it predominantly right. So sometimes it doesn't identify critical controls correctly, but you can obviously go in and change it. Sometimes some of the controls I don't like. Sometimes it misses things, but it's better than starting from a blank slate. And in some cases, it does an absolutely magnificent job. So I've run various different bow ties where I knew nothing about the subject matter, past the subject matter experts, and it produced some fantastic results. So it'll also sometimes hallucinate and just come up with just things that are purely wrong as well. So you've got to be on the lookout for those sorts of things. So if I wanted to do the same thing, but I wanted to do it through the AI process, what I can do is I can do the Bowtie AI wizard. Okay, so when I do the Bowtie AI wizard, I can then go through and I can then fill out some details on here and generate some different events. Now, what I'm going to do here is there's one for combustible. I did this one earlier on, I was just playing with it just to see what it would produce. So combustible dust safety was an example that one of the attendees today actually produced. When you click on generate, what it does is it produces a list of hazards and you choose the appropriate hazard and then it generates the related unwanted event. Now inside here, you can also put in custom instructions. So it's going off to an AI and this is giving it more information. So I like to give it information about what is a critical control, what defines a critical control. So it comes back with more useful and more accurate critical controls. Okay, so in this particular case, I'll just click on generate and what that's doing right now is it's going out to the AI and it's coming back with hazards and unwanted events. So I'll give that a couple of moments to do it. And then after it's done that, which it's done, I can then say, okay, dust accumulation in confined spaces is, in this particular case, a hazard that I'll look at. And then I'll put in dust ignition or explosion or fire outbreak. Let's just choose explosion. Okay, so at this particular point here, I've got my custom instructions telling it what I want it to, what a critical control actually is. And I've taken a lot of this from the ICMM guidelines. I then choose generate the bow tie. So what that's now doing is it's going off to the AI. And by the way, if it doesn't generate it the way I want, I can regenerate it again. So sometimes I'll have to do that. So sometimes I'll go, no, that doesn't look good. It's had a glitch. I'm just going to press the button again and see what it produces next time, and it will, maybe with more instructions. This one hasn't done too bad a job, but I don't think it's got enough causes, but we'll leave it at that one for the moment. So what you can then do is you can then zoom in and you can actually see what was right and what was not right. So it's come up with a series of controls. The dark blue ones are defined as critical ones. I might decide that I don't want that one. I don't think that's really too specific, so I'm just going to remove that. And I might want to add another one in, so I can do that quite easily. So I can then add another control in. And now at this stage, it hasn't gone off and created all of those back-end records. At this stage, if I've got to where I meant to be, at this stage, all it's done is generated a diagram. Once I've gone through with the team and we've verified and added our own ones. Now, again, you could start from scratch and not use the AI. You don't have to. But once I've done that, I can save this, by the way. I can save it, come back after lunch, if you're on a long workshop, and continue working with it. But once I'm really happy with it, what I can then do is I can go through and say, go off and create those back-end records. So what that means is it creates a document for every single control in the system. And then I can then fill out the details, more information about each of the controls and for the actual risk and the actual event itself. So if I go back to this one here, this one that I'm looking at over here with the uncontrolled release of stored energy, that already has the backend records created. So I've already clicked that button for that one there. It can take a couple of minutes to generate it, so I'm not going to spend time watching you just watching it sit there generating the backend records. So creation of the bow tie becomes easier. It also picks up things that you may not have picked up. But again, of course, it's AI. It's not going to be perfect. But one of the other things that it is useful for is, I'll just zoom in and out on that one a little bit more. So this is uncontrolled release of stored energy. So in this particular case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do AI analysis. So in the AI analysis, it's going to come up with a warning just to say they just warn me for accuracy, which is fine. You can turn that off if you want to. So what that's doing is it's analysing the bow tie that I've already generated, and then it's coming back, or will come back, with suggestions for improvements to the bow tie diagram. So not only can you get it to build a diagram, you can also get it, after you've worked on it and you've done the workshop, you can then get it to critique it and do some analysis, and then you can run and see whether you want to add those extra things or remove things or whatever it is that it's asked you to do. Okay, you also, on the bow tie diagram, you also have the ability to show only critical controls. You can show control types once you've populated each of these documents with the control types, and once you've populated it with the effectiveness of the control, you can also show that as well on the diagram itself. One other thing, just as part of the bow tie, so again, this is the planning process of identifying what's a critical control, what are the causes, consequences, and so forth. You can also import bow tie diagrams from existing or from other things that you might have done either through flow diagrams or other products that have built bow ties, and then it will typically go in here and actually build that out for you, as opposed to having to manually type each one individually. Okay, so jumping back to the process for a moment, and let's just have a look at the overall process. I'll just bring the presentation back just briefly. So far, what we've looked at the planning process, we've done the identified unwanted events, we've identified controls, we've worked out what are critical controls. We've seen that you can go in and you can identify performance requirements, and we can, inside each of those documents, I didn't show it, but you can set an accountable person, and you can have whatever configurable notifications and reminders and so forth about that. What we're about to look at is the verification side and the reporting side of the bow tie. So what you'll notice at the top right-hand corner, there's something that says control issues. So what this is saying is, actually before we do, I might just show you some of the ones that we did. We had a few others that people asked for. So I did that one just then, by the way. But let's have a look at some of the other ones that we did. That was another one for dust accumulation. Let's see if I can get Teams out of the way. Okay, this one was someone fed back in one for, so this is one, these are ones that I built with the AI this morning based on some feedback. So loss of containment of sodium ethyl xanthate. Okay, so in this case, it's again come up with a variety of causes and controls and mitigating controls and consequences on the right-hand side. So these ones I've built, I haven't actually converted those into back-end records yet, but I can do that, and then I can start populating that data. So we did some other ones in there, explosion, okay, I think we did that before, uncontrolled release of energy. I did a fun one before of failure to follow protocols. So this one was improper handling of classified materials, which is sort of a bit topical at the moment, failure to follow protocols, and then it then came back with causes, controls, and so on and so forth. So you can actually use this process for anything. Some of our customers are actually using it for looking at not just safety, but also looking at, say, financial risks and reputational risks and those sorts of things. So you can use this tool, use the AI, modify it, and use the process for lots of things. So the fact that you've got an AI that can build it quickly and you can do this quickly means that it can be used for other things. Obviously, we're focusing on critical control management for safety in this presentation today. Okay, so what I'd like to focus on is this particular bow tie here. We've got control issues. So So we don't have any control issues, there's no reds, but what we're about to get into is the actual verification process itself. So the verification process could be any module, either inside this system or even outside with an external system. So we have APIs that can talk to this system from other places like maintenance systems. In this case, I'm going to show you some of the processes inside this system itself. So I'm going to close down that critical risk event, and this could have been from an inspection, this verification process, or it could be from an incident report or an observation, but I'm just going to do the inspection in this case. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to do a general inspection. And in this particular case, so I could be out in the field, I could be using my mobile app. I could be just doing it from here, which is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to fill out large amounts of data because that's just going to be time consuming. So I could select the asset, I could put in the inspection date and notify and so on. So there's an inspection here with a whole series of questions in there, and you can sign that if you're doing it on a mobile device and so on and so forth, take pictures and whatever. So at the top here, what I've got is a question that is linked to the CCM module. So we have the ability for you to say, if we've got any question within the system or anything in the system you want it to link to the CCM module, you can run a rule that then changes things within the CCM module and identifies the issues, so it's managed in one central location. So I'm going to say no to this, and I'm just going to say, okay, tags are missing. So this is a critical control verification. Okay, so we've verified that it's not working. I'd finish off the rest of it, but none of these are mandatory, just for demonstration purposes. I'm just going to mark that as complete, and it's now saving that information in the system, and it's now doing a whole series of things in the background. Okay, so the things that it's doing in the background are things like updating the critical control, updating the risk event, updating the Bowtie, generating actions, creating verification records for reporting. So I'll go through each of one of those separately. So let's go through back to critical control management for a moment. And what you can see here is that's turned orange. So immediately we can see in our normal list of critical controls that we have an issue, and the status has changed to control issues. Again, I can look at the documents or I can look at the Bowtie. Looking at the documents just for the moment, and this is the actual document for the risk event, I can see that's the control that has an issue, and it's changed status to not effective and changed color to show that as well. Okay, if I go through here, I can look at the control history and I can see that today, 25th of the 3rd at 10:30, that's my time, the tag was not attached to a particular piece of equipment, and it gives whatever details and a link back to the inspection. Okay, if I want to look at the actual Bowtie itself, I can load the Bowtie, and immediately I've got a visual that we have a ineffective control on this Bowtie. And again, I could have opened that control by simply clicking on the corner, and it will open it up in the system itself. So typically what people do is they create a series of rules for their critical risks, or critical controls, I should say, and then they decide what they want to occur. Now, these are things that you can define yourself. They're not mandatory. I'm going to go through some of the things that it's done in the background as well. It's not, I won't show it, but it's notified the critical control owner. So an email's popped up into my mailbox to tell me, as the accountable person for that critical control or critical risk, that we have a problem. Now, again, we haven't had an incident. We've just identified a control's failed, and people welcome the fact that there's failures because it's a precursor to an incident and you prevented the incident. So the idea is you welcome when something goes red. Not that you want lots of failures, but you welcome it rather than having the incident itself. So what's actually happened? Let's have a look at what else it's created. It's created an action in the actions module, and it's automatically assigned it to urgently investigate missing tags on a particular piece of equipment, and it's assigned it to the appropriate people. So they're predefined actions that you can define in the system. If I go back to my critical control management, it's also gone through, so it's updated the statuses and the documents themselves, but it's also gone through and created a critical control verification. Okay, so in that critical control verification, every time you verify a critical control, it can create both a pass and or a fail document. So normally you'd see many passes here, you wouldn't see too many fails. In this particular case, it's created a fail from the record I've done today, and it can record a whole lot of information about this particular verification. So it can push information through to this verification from information from the inspection that was done or the incident near miss that was logged or whatever it might be. It can say who's verified it, whether it's a pass or a fail, further information, some links back to what was done, and so on and so forth. So typically, this means that you're not doing any extra work. When you've got this in production, typically, for your average frontline worker, they're doing the inspections that they would normally do themselves. So they're going through and they're identifying, they're answering questions as they would normally do. But their questions that are in the inspections have been tailored to be specifically looking at critical control verifications. What are the critical controls we need to verify? And then when you do those inspections, it's then generating a whole lot of data, which you can then use to then chart. So configurable dashboard, you can put in whatever widgets you like on here. This one's looking at the critical control verifications, in this case, just the failures by the different critical risks. This one's looking at a particular critical control, and it's looking at a KPI for how many we should have done in this particular time frame. This one is looking at the fails versus the passes, and you can drill down into the data here as well. So you can then click on these and then open up the individual ones. This one is getting a little bit more granular. So this is by asset, or in this case, equipment number. So down the bottom, each of these items here is an equipment number, and you're identifying, again, you could be doing this by whatever, slice and dicing it by whatever you want to graph it by. So whatever you've pushed into that verification document, you can actually report on. And again, remember, it was just, all of this was done by purely just ticking something in an inspection. So in this case, I could say, look, I'm interested in the passes, sorry, the fails. So I've taken the passes out, and I can start looking at this qualitatively as well as quantitatively. So I can start saying, how come we've only got 2 verifications for this particular piece of equipment? Are people not bothering? So typically, senior management look at this and they start asking questions. So they're focusing less on frequency rates and how many people they've hurt or injured. And they're focusing on prevention. Why haven't we verified? Why have we only done 2 there? Maybe that piece of equipment was out of service. Maybe it's at the back of the workshop and it's hard to get to, and people just don't bother, but they ask the questions. How come we've got 104 here? I'd expect to see some failures, might be a question that gets asked. Are people just doing a tick and flick exercise? Now, what some organisations have done as part of their inspections is they've highlighted with icons in the inspection to say this is a critical control verification, pay attention, is what they're putting in those, which is essentially what it's saying, is pay attention. Don't just answer yes, 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 no, 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 or whatever it might be. So it's putting the focus on people understand where there's something that's critical. You can put that into your inspection processes and your inspection questionnaires and make sure that people are aware of that. Okay, so that's the reporting process. So now I've got an integrated bow tie. So I've got the planning process. And in fact, if we go back to this diagram again, we identified the unwanted events. We build in controls. We identified the critical controls. You do that through going into the control and choosing it. You're defining how should it perform. You're making sure that there's an accountable person so when it does fail or when it does need review, that it is reviewed. You're then putting in verification and reporting processes through dashboards and also setting up rules to automatically generate those verification processes. So typically what's happening within organisations is the people who are doing this manually, they're doing their inspections and then they're exporting out the questions and then they're trying to feed that into a dashboard. And they're doing it outside and separate of the actual bow tie. So if the bow tie changes, then they've got to go back and change a whole lot of stuff. So there's a lot of disconnected processes typically, but using the myosh Critical Control Management module, the whole thing is designed from the ground up to actually have a fully integrated approach where you do all of these things as part of the system. Now, what we've typically found is organisations that have adopted this approach have also found a significant, when they've done it properly, they've actually seen a significant reduction in other incidents as well, because what they're doing is they're focusing on the work that's being done and how the critical and how that work is controlled, and that becomes the focus. It becomes a learning tool to improve what you do. So it really does become a continuous improvement type approach to managing safety. Okay, Christina, have you got any questions that have come in? Are there any bow ties anyone wants me to generate just while we've got a couple of minutes? If there's any.
No, I haven't. Nobody has popped anything in. So if there are any last minute bow ties you would like to be generated as an example for you guys, please pop them in the chat. Wow, what an incredible product. I bet you're just so incredibly happy and proud of what you guys have created. It's going to save lives, isn't it? It's just amazing. I'm very, very proud to be here with you guys at myosh. So, Adrian, thank you so much. I don't think there's anything coming in the chat, which is fine. That's all good. If anybody does want to ask any questions or have any examples that they would like to be shown with this whole process, please reach out to either Adrian or myself or anybody at myosh. We're always around and so very happy to help. And we can organise a demo for you and your team at any stage. So more than happy to get that sorted for you. I have recorded today's session as well, so we will be able to send this out to everybody who is registered. So if you had to duck out or if you weren't even able to make the session, that's all good. We will send this out to you all. And as I said, if you have any questions whatsoever, please reach out to us. We will love to chat a little bit more. Adrian, do you have any final parting words before we head off?
Yeah, just a couple. I think to me, this is one of the most important things that you can do within an organisation, and not many organisations are doing this effectively. I've come across a lot of organisations that are focusing, and I'm not saying you don't do these other things, but they're focusing on incident investigation processes, observations, and so forth. But they're often disconnected from what's critical, what's important, what needs to be done, working on this, I feel that it truly makes a difference, especially in the organisations we've been putting it into. All of a sudden, they're creating thousands of verifications. They're getting data. They can show their customers. They can report out to their customers and say, okay, we're working on your site. We can show you how we work. We can show you how we verify any critical controls and how we're preventing incidents. So it's a tool that customers, once they've implemented, are really excited about. When they see those verification documents, those thousands of verification documents start to generate meaningful dashboards and things that you can actually produce, it's just absolutely terrific. And we get a lot of people just with big smiles on their faces and some very, very happy meetings, which I absolutely love. Making a difference is just so important. And as you can see, I'm very passionate about it. But yep, I'll talk about it till the cows come home. So yeah, I'd like
literally, we've had to shoo the cows away.
I'd like to thank everyone for attending today as well and hanging on to the end. So really appreciate your time as well as I appreciate it's valuable.
Amazing. Thank you so much, everybody. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out to any of us here at myosh. Always around and happy to help. And I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. See you at the next one. Bye.
Cheers. Thank you.